Nico and Thrax are down to one last vase in order to find the thief. Chapter 18. The Last Vase. Master Ariston came home from the theater, convinced he could be a successful playwright. He kept me working through the morning on a play script, a love story about Zeus and Hera. I did not have the chance to talk to Thrax till late in the afternoon. I was expecting the thief to steal the pot after the play when all the props were packed away, he explained. But he must have been waiting in the wings. And when he heard King Admetus announce that he was going to smash the Hydra, he must have thought it was going to happen for real. So he dived on stage and made off with it. I have to say that daring escape to the audience was inspired. You weren't to know any of that was going to happen, I comforted him, looking at the list of vases on the scrap of papyrus. We crossed out the items that had already been stolen. I wonder which one of these remaining pots is the marked one, I said. It's Lakethos, said Thrax, crossing out the craters. Pernicius the Oracle holds fortune-telling meetings in his andron. I slipped out and attended one of them while you and Master Ariston were riding yesterday. The craters were on display in his meeting room. They are not marked. That does only leave the Lakethos, I said, brought by someone called Polydeuces of Rhodes. I asked after Polydeuces at the Agora, said Thrax. No one's heard of him. It must be a false name. That must be why the fourth pot hasn't been found yet, I said. The thieves are looking for someone who doesn't exist. Thrax held out the papyrus. It says here that Lakethos is decorated with athletes and swallows. Who does that remind you of? Pandion the wrestler at the party. He sang about swallows and said they reminded him of Rhodes. Polydeuces claims he comes from Rhodes, and Pandion said he was going to Rhodes. That's a connection if I ever saw one. Do you think it was Pandion the wrestler who ordered the Lakethos? Yes. But why would he order it under a false name? Who do you associate Polydeuces with? Polydeuces is a famous character in mythology. He's a demigod whose brother Castor died because he was immortal. Polydeuces agreed to share his immortality with him, and Zeus turned both of them into the twin stars so they could be together forever in the heavens. Do you think Pandion has a twin like Polydeuces, and he used the name as a tribute? Thrax nodded. I think he had a twin, but he died when they were young. Do you remember he told you my smile reminded him of someone from his childhood, someone very dear to him? He must have been talking about a twin brother, a secret brother. My guess is that Pandion and his brother were born in Rhodes as slaves. Then a rich couple adopted Pandion and brought him up in Corinth as their own flesh and blood. They didn't adopt his brother because he had some kind of physical defect. Perhaps he was lame or blind. Remember, Pandion said he was cursed by the gods. I spoke to Euripides about him yesterday. His parents are great patrons of the arts, and the playwright has met them at social gatherings. There's gossip about them. No one knows where they're really from. They popped up in Corinth when Pandion was already old enough to train at the gym. But why hide the fact that Pandion is adopted? I asked. There is shame for couples who cannot have children, said Thrax. Foolish people believe they are cursed. The same people think children without perfect bodies are punishments from the gods. They must have made Pandion promise he would never reveal the truth about his lowly birth or his imperfect brother. So when he ordered a new Lakethos for his brother's grave, he told his slave to give a false name. Pandion must have gone to Rhodes to visit the grave, and to mark it with a new Lakethos. That means we can never hope to catch the thief trying to steal it. Thrax put away the scrap of papyrus. Pandion's Lakethos has given me an idea. We can still try to trap the Cyclops, but we have to do it tonight. The wedding is tomorrow, and we'll be leaving Corinth after that. My heart sank as I realized what he meant. We only had one day left to save Gaia. Chapter 19. Shadows in the Graveyard. The sun was already low in the sky as Thrax and I slipped out of the back door. The house was humming with activity. Women were arriving for the last of Mistress Pandora's ceremonies. They were dressed in flowing robes and carried flasks of wine or baskets of ripe fruit. Some of them were drunk. High up in the Acrocorinth, the priestesses of Aphrodite were burning sacrifice at the door of the temple. The smoke from their altar rose up into the fading sky, like a dark column. Below us, the agora lay under a thin veil of evening mist. It made me think of a dead man on a pallet, waiting to be carried to his funeral. It was getting chilly, and I was glad I had put on my himation and boots. Thrax didn't seem to mind the cold. He was wearing a tattered himation, but only sandals on his feet. A large bag was slung over his shoulder, bumping against his back as he walked. I carried a parcel, too, hidden under my own himation. It was an old water jug Thrax had borrowed from the storeroom. "Remember, I'm going to pretend to be Polydeuces of Rhodes, and you are my slave," he said. "We are going to offer sacrifice at the tomb of my parents, Cylon and Aldelpha, and we're using Lacheithos in honor of my dead brother Leonidas, who is buried with them." I tightened my grip on the water jug under my cloak. It was getting heavier as I walked. "Cylon and Aldelpha? Is there really such a grave?" "Yes," said Thrax. "I found it earlier today while you were working. I also stopped at the agora, announced that my master, Polydeuces of Rhodes, was offering sacrifice at his brother's grave tonight. You can be sure that the thief's spies have told him the news by now. Then I paid a quick visit to the Archon. He's sending some of his men to help us. They'll be lying in wait close to the tomb." The sun had almost set as we neared the city gates. A guard was lighting a fire in a copper brazier when he waved us through without even looking up. "Draw your himation over your head," said Thrax. "We don't want to be recognized." We both covered our heads as the city gates swung shut behind us. Ahead lay a wide road with a long line of ancient cypress trees on either side. It made me shudder just to look at them. Cypress trees are the symbols of death. Legend has it that if you sleep in their shade, their roots will sap your brain, turning you into one of the undead. Above us, the darkening sky was full of twittering swallows, and somewhere an early owl hooted. Huddled together between the tree trunks, we could see dozens of tombstones. They stood in jagged lines, some of them leaning at odd angles like the waxy teeth of old men. Behind the cypress trees, the ground rose steeply, forming two grassy hills. They were both covered in more graves. Some marked with just a funerary vase, others with elaborately carved tombstones. "We are walking in the valley of death," I whispered to Thrax. "And we are being followed already," he whispered back. I just caught a glimpse of a shadow darting behind the tombstones to my right. I started to turn, but Thrax grabbed my arm. "Don't look round. We mustn't let them know we're expecting anyone. Just walk at a normal pace." We continued in silence, and soon we came to a tall umbrella pine, its twisted branches reaching out across the road. "We turn right here," said Thrax, and we left the paved road and started up the hill. The graves here were more widely spaced, and a few had lamps burning on them. Some of the tombs were ancient. The stone carvings on them had worn away or were covered in lichen. It was dark now. We passed a couple offering sacrifice at a small tomb. They had a fire burning which lit up the gravestone. I noticed the carving on the headstone, a small boy holding a dog on a leash. He must have been their son. Thrax took an unlit torch from under his cloak and gestured at them, asking if he might light it at their fire. The man nodded. "Go ahead." Now that we had a light, we could see more clearly. The shadow that had followed us on the road was still with us. I noticed it darting between two tombstones, its himation flapping like a bat. But was it a thief or one of the Archon's men waiting to help us? "Look," said Thrax, "here's the tomb." Cylon and Adelpha's grave was very elaborate, a rectangular stone shaped like an altar. The carving showed two people sitting at a table. The man was holding a dove, and the woman a pomegranate, an offering to Persephone, queen of the underworld. They stared back at me with empty eyes. Below the carving, their names were written in stone, in the hope that people would remember them. A third name, Leonidas, showed that their son was buried here too. Thrax stood the burning torch in the soil so that threw flickering shadows all around us. It made the graveyard look like the entrance to Hades itself. I guarded the water jug while Thrax cleared the tomb of debris. My heart was pounding in my chest. This was the closest I had come to physical danger since the ambush on the isthmus. Thrax spread the contents of his bag on the tomb, fruit, vegetables, and a small loaf of bread. Then he scooped up armfuls of dry weeds, piling them high to cover the offerings. Thrax held the torch to the weeds, and the altar lit up with roaring flames. "Oh, my father Cylon," he called out, "my mother Adelpha, and my brother Leonidas, we come tonight to pronounce your name, that it might live long in our memory, and to honor Leonidas with wine from a new Lakithos." He gestured at me, and I unwrapped the bundle to reveal the water jug. Thrax took it, pulled out the stopper, and poured wine on the altar. The fire hissed, the dying flames plunging the graveyard back into near darkness. I heard a loud grunt behind me, then a hooded figure leaped toward us. 2 more figures joined it, knocking me out of the way as they tried to wrestle the water jug from Thrax. I looked around for the Archon's men, but there was no movement in the darkness. "Help!" I cried. "We're under attack!" But we seemed to be alone with the thieves. We had been forgotten, or the gang had bribed the Archon's men to stay away. One of our assailants kicked Thrax in the stomach, sending him reeling to the ground. He snatched the water jug from his arms. "Got it, men, let's go." "Wait!" Thrax got to his knees, gasping for air. "That's not the Lakithos you're looking for. It's just an old water jug." The men stopped dead in their tracks and turned in unison toward us. The one holding the water jug was standing very close to Thrax's torch, and the flames lit his face under the hood. His eyes were bright with fury. Chapter 20. Prisoners. One of the men yanked the torch out of the ground and held it over the water jug. "It's true, this is a worthless piece of rubbish." His accomplice hurled the jug across the graveyard, and it shattered against a headstone. The third man hissed, "Where's our Lakithos?" "We don't have it." The men looked at each other under their hoods, and one of them nodded in agreement. "Take them to the captain." The other 2 dived at us, and I was dragged to the ground by strong, muscular hands. There was the sound of tearing cloth as one of the men tore strips off his himation to make blindfolds. I was bound and gagged, the strips of cloth biting so deep into my wrists that my hands went instantly numb. One of our captors pulled me back to my feet, and I was dragged roughly down the hill, my boots slipping on the wet grass. Thrax was close behind me, grunting angrily through his gag. After a while, the grass was replaced by hard ground. We had come to the ancient umbrella pine by the road. The thieves bundled me onto a cart, and Thrax was thrust in after me. The wooden boards creaked as one of the men clambered on board with us, pushing me roughly aside to make room for his bulk. I could smell damp clay on his tunic. The Cyclops. He leaned towards me, and I felt the tip of a knife prick my chest. "One false move from either of you, and you'll be back in the graveyard for good." The cart started moving, the donkey's hooves clip-clopping on the paving stone. I wondered which direction we were going, back towards Corinth, or the other way, to the harbor in Cincray. Before long we stopped, and the driver spoke to someone in hushed, urgent tones. There was the clink of money exchanging hands. I heard the rasp of a wooden bolt being drawn across wood, followed by the light creak of well-oiled metal hinges. The thieves had bribed a guard to open the city gate. We were back in Corinth. We trundled through, and I heard the gate close again. I hoped the noise would bring someone to a window, but if it did, no one spoke or called. Soon the cart turned a corner, and a metal door crashed shut behind it. The Cyclops pulled me roughly off the cart. Another door opened, and I stumbled over a doorstep. My feet were kicked from under me, making me fall backwards into a seat. The gag was removed from my mouth. I heard water burbling faintly, and birds tweeting, then the clink of a beaded curtain being parted. "Captain," said one of our captors, "we went to the graveyard as instructed, but we did not get the Lakithos. Master Polydeuces here tricked us." "I am not Polydeuces of Rhodes," said Thrax in a seat next to me. "I am an impostor. My friend and I played a trick on your henchman, Captain." The seat creaked as he leaned forward. "You might have bought off the Archon's men, but I took the precaution of having a backup plan. There was an unseen witness to your men's attack on us tonight, and that witness has summoned the law. It should be at the door any moment." This was the first time I'd heard of a backup plan. Had Thrax really hired a witness to shadow us? Who would that be? There was only one person that I knew Thrax would trust, Mistress Fotini. She must have been the hooded figure I saw following us. A loud banging made me jump in my seat. "Open this door in the name of the law!" It was a voice I recognized at once. Odious the Archon himself had come to our rescue. So, now that they've been captured after their somewhat brilliant plan to find out who the thief is, what's going to happen